evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. The big focus has been on the all-party meet called today to discuss India's united response to the situation in China. And while we've seen a lot of opposition leaders demand responsive answers from the Modi government on what action has been taken so far and why we ended up being a victim of this kind of brutality at the LAC, there have also been all-around promises of presenting a united front. The real question, though, is what does India do next? Where do we go from here? It's been pretty much 5 days since the brutal encounter on the LAC, which resulted in the death of 20 Indian soldiers. So far, there has been a calm approach in the face of it from both sides, no further escalation, and talks at various levels have been going on. But through it, China has stuck to its position that it did not in fact transgress into Indian territory and has tried to lay claim to the Galvan Valley, something that the Indian side has retorted to very strongly. So where to from here? To speak on this, I am joined today by Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravart, former Secretary of the MEA. Dr. Harsh Pant joins me today, Director of Research at ORF, and Manu Pubby, Senior Editor of Economic Times, someone who's been breaking all of those stories on what is happening at the LAC. I'm also joined by Sanjeev Srivastava, political commentator. Welcome to all of you and great to have you on the show. Manu, let me just begin by getting a sense from you on where we stand right now. We know that military level conversations are going on, but behind the scenes, is there a diplomatic conversation going on as well? And is the Indian side beefing up its reinforcements on the LAC?
See, talks have been on both levels, you're right, on the military level and the diplomatic level. In fact, the return of soldiers and the whole idea of starting military talks came down from diplomatic level engagements. But we have to understand the situation on the LAC. It remains very grim. You know, we have got the soldiers back, after talks, the site of engagement which took place on Monday night, that is disengaged. But all along the LAC, the Chinese buildup is very strong, and a lot of it is in Indian territory. They have taken up positions in what we consider to be our land in at least 4 other locations other than Galwan. And the Chinese stand this time seems to be different. You know, we have to understand that this is not a usual situation which happens on the border. In the past, the Chinese would come into what we think is our land, would sit for a while and go back. But this time they've come prepared. They have come with a lot of backup. They have thousands of soldiers are there. This is, I would imagine, the most tense situation we have had on the border with China since 1967. And that requires a lot of working to do. And I don't think we are looking at a short-term solution. There has to be more talks. There have to be more diplomatic level engagements. And in the background of it, there's always that danger of another such incident happening like what we saw on Monday with the clash of soldiers, because when you have so many high-charged soldiers facing off for weeks, you know, there's always a chance that things can go bad. So.
Yeah. You know, Manu, I just want to get, your sort of sense on what is the deal with all of these reports about 10 Indian soldiers being returned to us and being released from Chinese captivity. There were some newspaper reports which suggested this was the case. The Indian official statement has been that there were no soldiers from India in Chinese captivity. The Chinese statement has been that there are no Indian soldiers with us presently. What is the true picture?
What happened is that on Monday night, when the encounter or the clash took place, a lot of things were very confused. And I think because the Chinese came in such large numbers, and our guys were not prepared to be ambushed, we did lose a few people to injuries. And we also were unaccounted for at least 10 people. And it was later found that these 10 soldiers, which included at least 4 officers, were in fact in Chinese custody. So the first 3 days of engagements at the Major General level were to secure their release. And that release was secured yesterday. So the Indian statement of the army, which came in the evening, in fact came perhaps moments or a few minutes after the soldiers were released, in which they said that we have no soldiers missing in action. Today also the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that at present there are no Indian soldiers in Chinese hands.
So they're technically correct.
We did. Both of them are technically correct, but yes, there was a crisis situation. That is why we had 3 rounds of major and level talks, and now the soldiers are back. It's a happy ending for those soldiers at least, and they are being debriefed as we speak in Leh. They are being spoken to understand what was the sequence of events which led to their deaths.
Okay. Dr. Harsh Pant, what strikes one in this situation and what has happened in the last 4 or 5 days, that after the incident on Monday, neither side is clearly in a mood to escalate. So we have said very, unequivocally that we are, more than capable of defending our territory and all of that. So a strong message gone there, but there has been a real attempt to calm things down, with the example of the information put out on the capture of Indian soldiers, or the detention of Indian soldiers. The Chinese on their side also are trying to play things down. Why do you think the situation is, and does this then point to a calming of the situation, or is it still unpredictable?
Well, I think the larger sort of relationship between India and China remains unpredictable, but this particular episode, clearly there are indications that both sides want to calm things down, for the simple reason that escalation at this point is a fool's errand for both sides. If you want to escalate militarily, both sides will lose, both sides will have great costs imposed on them. And two nuclear powers, they can have differences, but they cannot go to overt hostility. We know that through our history, we know that through our theoretical modeling and game theorizing. So we know that it would be very, very costly for both sides, and both sides also, policymakers, understand the calculus. I think the challenge here is that this perhaps we will de-escalate it, and we will take it. The temperatures will be lowered down by the two sides, and we will move on. But the challenge will remain, I think, as Manu was talking earlier. The boundary remains very tense, and I don't see it going back to status quo ante very soon, because clearly on both sides there are apprehensions that if you take one step back today, the other side will come and grab that. And that is, as far as India is concerned, India has to do that, because a lot of these Chinese soldiers are on Indian territory, which India claims to be its territory, and India would like them to leave that intact. So I think what we are largely looking at is both sides trying to clamp things down, trying to bring the temperature down, and to use diplomatic channels to resolve this particular problem. But the larger issue of LAC, I think, will remain very hot for a very long time.
What really can India do here, Ambassador Pinak? I want to just get your view over here, because it's just an untenable position to say, okay, you took some of our land, so we'll let it go and let's smoke the peace pipe now. It's also untenable to say that we will do nothing about the loss of 20 of our soldiers in such a brutal manner. So where really can India bear and come to bear that pressure on China?
Well, I think I'll take you back to an incident which all of us know, called Sundaram Cho in Arunachal Pradesh, where China intruded, sat on the territory, and we reinforced our things, and we basically surrounded them. But there was no fighting, but ultimately they went back. Now, it was again China's way of testing how India will react. And in this case, of course, it was a similar endeavor, but then there has been a lot of history after that, like Doklam, like Nakula. But so what I think happened was that the Indian soldiers, the CEO and his men, walked into a very pre-planned kind of an ambush, because that is what it seems to me, because otherwise this thing wouldn't have happened. And when they tried to remove the tents at that point, where they felt that the agreement had been reached that the Chinese should not be there, then the fracas happened. And I think they were attacked, and the Chinese were prepared in terms of their sort of the kind of weapons that they had. So I think we were caught by surprise, and our boys fought back, and more reinforcements came and they fought. But the point is that we have lost our brave soldiers. Chinese also may have had some casualties, although it's not clear. There's no official statement, or there is, I don't know. So I think what we will have to do now, in my view, is to, of course, cool down the border so that there is no further sort of, either hand to hand or whatever pushing and shoving, etc. But the thing about restoring status quo, I think we will have to maintain. And if Chinese have walked, the problem is, of course, the perception of the LAC. We think the LAC is here, they think the LAC is here. We do patrolling up to our point of the LAC, they want to do patrolling to their point of the LAC. This time around, we were taken, I think, by surprise.
Ambassador, that's always been the case.
Chinese moved.
Yeah, that's always been the case. The LAC has always been this sort of amorphous line.
No, I'm going back to something else.
That's always been the case. My question is, what are we going to do now? Now we have yeah.
Well, we'll have to first, of course, cool it down in the sense that we should ensure that there are no further clashes. And then, of course, the talks will have to happen. No further clashes has to be done at the military level. And then, of course, the diplomatic and other levels have to be explored as to how we go from here. And if the Chinese say, we are not budging, then, of course, things will become more difficult. Then we will have to think about our options. There are, of course, options being explored at the moment. All kinds of options, not just any military option. So I think that is where we are at the moment, and let us see what happens, how it further sort of progresses, this whole fracas that we have had with loss of lives for a very which hasn't happened.
Does this administration, absolutely, sir. Sanjeev Srivastava, does this government have the sort of understanding that is being shown on this panel, for example, to say that let's see what happens, let's cool tempers, because this has been a real affront, and some of that anger that people are feeling has been directed towards things like boycott Chinese goods and other calls like that. But sooner or later that question of accountability will be asked, that what are we doing about it? Are we going to be sitting back after being dealt a bloody nose?
And who is going to ask that? The opposition doesn't have the numbers. And also when it does ask questions, it really doesn't have the support of much of the media. So I don't know who will ask the questions. But frankly, we really don't have much of a choice but to agree with most of the panelists. It's we who have been caught by surprise. We have been humiliated. We have suffered losses of lives at our end. Chinese have walked into our territory. They are occupying it currently, and really it's just a summary of things, or how things stand today. That all we can talk about, and with good sense and good reason. I actually concur with everyone that we have to cool the borders down. We have to return to the negotiating table, while the Chinese have actually. They've already said that Galwan Valley is theirs, and they have actually activated 3 or 4 other points also along the LAC 3000 in some other parts. That's what reports are. So it's a legacy issue. Historically, we have boxed ourselves into a corner. Last 50, 60 years, we have not developed our infrastructure.
Sanjeev, the fact that an all-party meeting has been called on this. Sanjeev, the fact that an all-party meeting has been called on this, and there is an attempt to get everyone on board, this kind of an attempt was not seen in the past. When similar situations arose, whether it was Doklam or whether it was other.
Congress party has no locus standi.
It was not seen before. My question simply is that, is there a need?
Okay, what's your question? Is there a need?
My question is this government feeling the need to have everyone on board? And why are they feeling that need if it's so all-powerful and no one is asking any questions in any case?
See, it's very good that we are finally coming around to the view as a nation that we still are a democracy, and we need to have all-party meetings. We need to take the nation and opposition parties into confidence, because it is perhaps for the first time in last 6 years that the kind of nationalist tiger this government was riding, now it's very difficult to dismount this tiger. Because it's very easy to rubbish Pakistan or rubbish sections of people we don't particularly like or fancy within the country. But when confronted with a powerful enemy, suddenly all panelists and everybody is talking of reason. So voice of reason has surfaced when unfortunately we find ourselves in a difficult position. So we should always be a voice of reason, whether we are in a position of strength or position of relative weakness. Right now, and the Congress party is squarely to be blamed. I don't want to blame this government. If we are historically as a legacy, we find ourselves so defensive and in relatively a weaker position. Why wasn't infrastructure developed in border areas where Chinese have beefed up their infrastructure in the last 3 decades to such an extent? The Congress was in power most of the time. So it's not that I want to bat for the opposition or run down this government. The fact is that China is a global bully, but because we are its immediate neighbor, we suffer its bullying tactics more than anybody else. And we really don't know what to do.
No. So China's chosen to pick on us. If I take that, yeah, so I mean, the thing is, when you're faced with a bully, at some point you're going to have to stand up to this bully, because it won't stop at one transgression. And I'm just taking that analogy forward to what do you do in this situation. Dr. Pant, no, just let me take that forward. Dr. Pant, so what is then the next step? We've established, and it's been well established, that, you know, going into a full frontal military attack is not an option that India should necessarily look at. It doesn't make sense. Just pulling the plug on all kind of trade and Chinese imports also doesn't make sense. So then what next? We're going to have to find others who see reason and, you know, see what China has done incorrectly. We're going to have to find more friends. So where does that go in this direction? Do we see a closer cooperation with the United States? Do we see India strengthening its moves on the Quad?
Well, I don't really agree that India has not been proactive on the Chinese front. What India has been doing is what within our capabilities, what existed, we were trying to shape a narrative and we were trying to shape our policies. Like if you see for several years now, on several issues, India has squarely confronted China. On BRI, who was the first country that challenged China? And it continues to challenge China. On issues on Indo-Pacific, which is the country that challenges China in shaping the narrative. On Quad, in 2007, it was dismantled. In 2017, it was resurrected. So clearly, India has done within its abilities, within its capabilities, within its wisdom to take certain steps, acknowledging the very fact that we are discussing that, look, China is a very big entity you cannot take on. Name one country in the world today that has dared to take on China, apart from America that runs some FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations in South China Sea. You had the great and wise Barack Obama, who could not challenge China when the South China Sea crisis was emerging. So I don't think India is, in some ways an outlier. We have to deal with the world as it exists. Pakistan is a different ball game. China is a different ball game. We deal with them differently. That's the reality of the real world. Now the question is, what are our options? Clearly, our options on the military side are not that good. In any case, escalation, we don't know how limited conflict, how it will escalate. On trade, we know that if we go in for the kind of activism that some of the social media warriors are suggesting, we would end up, in a situation where our own economy will get hurt. So clearly, the options, as you point out, are going to be, how do you mobilize world opinion? How do we mobilize our friends? And how do we now take a stand and say, look, there are still people in the country who blame India for Indian foreign policy for what the Chinese have done. There are still people who are telling us today that, look, you are getting too close to the Americans. That's why Chinese are doing this. There are still people in this country who are saying, look, you are getting too aggressive. China has done this to you. Now, clearly, I think the Indian debate in China is nowhere over. You will see very soon knives will be out. You will see very soon various people will be coming out, and already they are coming out with their own version. I don't think we have ended the China debate in this country. Clearly, as a political entity, India's political leadership, India's political parties need to come to terms
Dr. Pant, Sure, but Dr. Pant, but surely the internal debate is not of greatest worry or concern at this point. Internal debate in a democracy like India will always be on. That
Yes, it will
do you
always,
really think
it
that's
will
the
always
focus?
happen. Yes, of
The
course.
focus
Of
surely
course.
should be on what China, what India should do next vis-a-vis China.
Yes, but where is that consensus? Have you made that consensus that we are going to go all out with Americans? Have you made that consensus that we are going to mobilize Quad in hard power terms? Every time you do certain things with America, you have people telling the government that, look, why are you going so close to the Americans? Why are you signing these defense pacts with the Americans? You recognizing full well your conditions on the borders are so acute, you are so disproportionately in favor of China that you cannot tackle it on your own. So clearly, I think you need to come to terms with this reality that India faces the largest, most difficult strategic challenge in the country.
No, sure. Let me take this to Ambassador Pinak as well. Do you think it's incumbent upon this government with this massive majority, with a very weak opposition, with every kind of backing conceivable, to feel bogged down by what XYZ think? The question is, what is this government going to do, and what are the strategic and diplomatic measures we can take? Let me ask you a specific question, in fact, Ambassador Pinak. Do you think that we've done a good enough job of telling the world how unfairly we've been treated by China just in the last 4 days?
Look, in the arena of international politics, self-interest is the primary objective of every country. I don't think the narrative that you are suggesting that we get into, that we should go around crying all over the world how we have been dishonored, I don't think we are getting into all of that. The world is seeing what is happening, and it's for them to develop their own position, and some countries are already developing it. Let me tell you something more, that we are talking about infrastructure on the border. By the way, the infrastructure on the border has progressed pretty well, and that is why one of the reasons is for this fracas is that. I would take you back to Lok Sabha debates where the former defense minister, Mr. Anthony, was very clearly saying that we did not develop the border regions because that was our policy. This was the Congress's legacy to us, saying that, and I know that. I've been trained in one of the frontier areas during my training as a foreign service officer. We do some military training. But so we were briefed and we were told that, this has been our strategy not to develop the border region. Now, and it was admitted in the Lok Sabha by Defense Minister Anthony. Since then, in the last decade or so, we have changed that policy and we are building our infrastructure. And one of the reasons that the Chinese may have been sort of worried about it was this infrastructure that we have built. That's very clear. I mean, that is very clear because they have the Karakoram Pass.
I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time, so I will have to end here, but I would humbly submit that I don't know what we will gain by now looking at the past and trying to pinpoint which government built infrastructure and which government did. We are faced with this situation today. What are we going to do about it today? Which is a big question that still needs to be answered. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show this evening on the first part of the debate. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we ask the trade question and the commerce question. Can we hit them where it hurts as far as trade relations are concerned? And I have Swaminathan Iyer joining me on that. Don't go away.